Highway Superintendent, and they're together here. We extend to you the privileges of the floor. We hope that you have been successful in your lobbying efforts today, and we will welcome you back anytime you come back to Albany. Thank you very much. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to have the members' attention. If we can now go to page 6 of the main calendar, Rules Report number 37 by Mr. Sweeney.
Page 6, Rules Report 37. The clerk will read.
Assembly 5424-A, Rules Report number 37, Mr. Sweeney, an act suspending the issuance of permits for the drilling of wells for natural gas extraction in certain areas.
An explanation has been requested, Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a bill that would do essentially two things. It would place a moratorium on the issuance of certain natural gas drilling permits and also require the completion of a comprehensive health impact assessment. The health impact assessment portion of this bill is exactly the same as the separate bill that we passed in this House overwhelmingly last year. The moratorium portion is a little bit different. It actually is significantly different in that it's a lot more selective and restricted than the previous moratoria bills that we have considered and passed in this House.
Ms. Corwin.
Thank you. Would the sponsor yield for some questions?
Will you yield, Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. I appreciate that. This moratorium that would be placed by this bill, does this moratorium apply only to high-volume horizontal fracking or to other forms of gas extraction?
It applies to drilling in low permeability shale formations, specifically such as the Marcellus and Utica, which are specified in the bill.
Sure, but
as a practical matter, horizontal hydrofracking, the high-volume hydrofracking, which isn't occurring in those locations. But as a practical matter, other types of drilling really don't work in those shale formations because you can't really extract gas with, let's say, vertical drilling in the Marcellus. There's a couple of scattered wells here and there. To the best of our knowledge, they actually aren't producing any gas.
Well, actually, I have 32 wells in my district alone. They're vertically drilled wells using hydrofracking fluid, small volumes, and those have been around for many, many years. So I guess with the language that's in this bill, my reading of it says that those types of wells we would not be able to apply for permits as well.
Well, forgive me, but is the locations you're referring to in the Marcellus or Utica?
Yes, it's in Utica.
Well, the type of fracking is really not the issue here. It's the formation. It's the location of the wells.
Okay, but the language of the bill specifically says drilling of wells for natural gas extraction. It doesn't specify just high-volume horizontal.
Well, it says... No, that's right, but it says in low permeability shales, gas pools such as the Marcellus and Utica shale formations.
Right.
According to DEC, wells other than high volume, which is not taking place in the state right now, are essentially not producing gas. There are some out there, but they're not productive because you can't really get. That's why they want to go to high volume, because the horizontal hydrofracking, because you can't really get gas from the type of drilling that's taken place in the past. And according to DEC, what they told us is there's a few permits here and there, but they're not actually producing gas.
Well, when I talk to the individuals in my district, what I'm hearing is something a little bit different. What I'm hearing is that they want to be able to come in and do the horizontal because the results would be much greater than doing a vertical well, but they haven't been applying for the permits because they're waiting for these draft regulations to be finalized. But since it's taking so many years to do this, certainly vertical drilling is a possibility, but if this bill passes, they would no longer be allowed to do that.
Well, I think I would have to disagree that vertical drilling is a possibility when DEC tells us that those types of wells in these shale formations are not producing gas. I doubt very much that they're going to spend the time and the money to drill wells that are unlikely to produce gas, especially if there is some prospect of getting permits down the road for the type of drilling that will produce gas.
Well, how likely those prospects are is looking dimmer and dimmer as we go through time here. The low-volume vertical drilling that's been done in New York since the 1940s. We've had a regulatory program in place since 1972. Have we had any experiences of problems? I mean, is there any reason to think that we should be trying to stop that type of drilling?
Have there been problems with vertical drilling? Yes.
That have been a problem?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's been accidents. There's been the same type of problems that are attributable to high-volume horizontal hydrofracking. There's been industrial accidents. There's been people who claim health problems. It's exactly the same sort of situation.
Well, like I said, I can speak for my district. In my district, these 32 wells, we've never had any kinds of issues, and this has been going on since the 40s. And certainly any kind of small issues have been dealt with, certainly nothing that would warrant a moratorium on any kind of future permitting. Just moving on here, Governor Patterson had vetoed a similar bill back in 2010, in part because, in his mind, it encompassed vertical and horizontal drilling. In fact, I'll read from his veto message. The expansive definition of hydraulic fracturing in the bill would prevent numerous individuals who've been drilling for oil and gas from obtaining a permit from doing so, costing the state hundreds or perhaps thousands of jobs. Now, is that something we're prepared to do by passing this bill?
Well, I suspect that Governor Patterson is going to have little to say about the prospects of this bill. And, someone else may see it differently. But you know what? Quite frankly, if we have to do when we do a bill with the Senate, if we have to do some sort of clarification, I'm fine with that. I'm telling you what the intent of the bill is. If if we have a difference and we have to do a clarification, we'll do it. Well, I don't want to get distracted by issues that are not relevant to the bill.
I don't know if I would necessarily call this a distraction. What we're talking about doing is taking away the opportunity for people to be able to lease their properties out for vertical drilling, which has been proven to be safe in New York State for many, many years. We've got a regulatory program in place since 1972, which up until this fracking horizontal issues come up never seemed to be a problem. Now we're talking about stopping that for the sake of pursuing some sort of controls over high volume fracking.
No, I think you're confusing the issues here. You're talking about vertical drilling generally, like in other areas of the state, for example, where it is prevalent and where it's been going on for many years, and it is productive, and it's not affected by this bill.
But
this bill refers...
No, but I have to disagree with you that because the language of the bill specifically states, and let me find it here, that the wells, suspending the issuance of permits for drilling of wells for natural gas extraction. Now, that would encompass...
low permeability shale, read the whole thing, in low permeability shale formations such as the Marcellus and the Utica. Anything outside of Marcellus and Utica, any kind of drilling outside of Marcellus and Utica is not affected by this bill.
But these are in the Utica shale.
But you just made reference a minute ago to vertical drilling, generally speaking, such as, in other areas of the state. Unlike previous bills that we've considered on this floor, that type of drilling is not part of this bill.
Well, like I said, the language of the bill says permits for drilling of wells for natural gas extraction in Utica and Marcellus. These are wells that are in the Utica, so therefore they would be affected by it.
I'll try this one more time because I don't want to beat a dead horse. That's not the intent of the bill. And if there's some clarification that is necessary somewhere along the way before this passes the Senate and goes to the governor, I'm happy to do that because that's not the intent of the bill.
I understand that. Moving on. Governor Cuomo had issued an executive order. Actually, Governor Patterson started with the executive order. Governor Cuomo extended it. It says no permits can be issued until the final regulations are completed. Is this not already a de facto moratorium on this kind of drilling process?
Well, I know I wouldn't consider it a moratorium because it's something that could change tomorrow without any input from the legislature, which I think is appropriate. The health commissioner just last month, in his letter to the commissioner of DEC, with regard to the deadlines that occurred and expired last month, made reference to the fact that more time is needed. He specifically referenced 3 studies, all of which we believe will not be completed before 2015. And so we have built this bill accordingly to deal directly with the concerns expressed by the Health Commissioner and the issues that he stated in his letter. And so that's where the time frame comes from. And so I think what would be appropriate so that everybody knows what's happening and what's going to happen is that there be a very specific moratorium in statute that allows everybody, the health department, the DEC, the private industries, the general public, everybody to know what's going to happen and within what time frame. That's not the story now.
Okay. If we could just talk about the study, since you brought it up. This bill requires a school of public health within the SUNY system to conduct the health assessment. How many schools of public health qualify?
There's at least 3.
3 whole ones. Okay. And
Albany, Buffalo, and downstate.
Okay. And how would it be decided which one would
SUNY.
conduct the study?
SUNY would decide.
So they would make the decision.
We want it to be independent.
Okay. Sure. Now, that, as you mentioned, the Department of Health is currently looking at studies. EPA is doing a study. Why do we need another study?
Well, the EPA study is one of the studies that the Health Commissioner cited and which will probably not be completed until 2015. The other studies are both taking place, or I think maybe at least one of them is not yet even underway, in Pennsylvania, which is a different state with a different geology and different considerations. There is no health impact assessment that has taken place in the state of New York, looking at our specific circumstances. And what the health department is doing now is not a health impact assessment. You know, they've, as far as we can tell, because this has not been a transparent process, as far as we can tell, they've retained some scientists who are looking at the S-guys to figure out whether or not the S-guys took everything into consideration that it should. That's not a health impact assessment of any description. And it's appropriate and necessary, I think, because public health and safety should be the #1 consideration before we do anything. I mean, I've done, can't begin to tell you, I've forgotten how many hearings on this subject, including one with Assemblyman Gottfried solely on the issue of health impacts. And you know what we heard was in those hearings, in all of those hearings, about health was very, very concerning. And I think health issues get raised just about more than anything else. And so it's important, I think, for New York to have its own independent health impact assessment, something that is not taking place now, and that is specific to New York State.
Okay. Now, this study, the School of Public Health would be required to hold 2 public hearings and have a 120-day public comment period?
Yes.
And then if there are any changes recommended to the study through those comments, then they would have to start again with 2 more public hearings and another 120-day public comment period?
There could be another comment period. That would be the second comment period at the discretion of SUNY. They also have a deadline, which is April 15th of 2015.
Okay.
We're not looking for this to drag on forever. We want it to be completed within the time of the moratorium, and so we wanted to very specifically include a deadline.
Yeah, well, you certainly want to rush it along because we've only been at this for, what, now 4 years?
No, we haven't done a health impact. We've been at nothing. We've been at nothing for all these years. I mean, that's my assessment of where we are. I've been saying for years that we should do a cost-benefit analysis of the whole thing, you know, to draw all the aspects of, well, no, we haven't done that either. You know, there's a lot of things that we could have been doing in the last few years that we haven't been doing, but we need to do before a final decision is made.
Okay. And finally, one question. As far as the moratorium is concerned, the moratorium would stay in place for how long?
May 15th of 2015.
Okay, regardless of when this study would be done. So if this study takes up until that time, if the study goes beyond that time,
the study is required to be done by a month earlier, April 15th of 2015. And that gives us a month to consider what the results of the study show.
Okay.
And if you know what, if it's done earlier, we can always revisit it at that time, depending on the results of the study.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. I appreciate that. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill, Ms. Corwin.
You know, we've been talking about fracking since I came into the legislature, which was 2009. And it seems to me that as time is going on, we just seem to be coming up with one more roadblock after another. We've had, you know, first we didn't like the way the regulations were being brought up. Then we didn't like, I mean, there were just so many things that we've had to deal with as far as trying to get this process going. And it's dragged on for so long that, quite frankly, the gas companies that were so excited about the opportunities here are now starting to shift their resources down to other states because they just don't think it's worth the time and effort, and they, quite frankly, don't believe that this process is ever really going to happen. And quite frankly, I share their disappointment and their concern. We talk about New York being open for business. This is a prime example of us not being open for business. This government has done everything they possibly can to stop progress, even when it comes down to ordering multiple different health studies. Yes, maybe the draft regulations, they looked at the health studies. We have the Department of Health looking at the DEC's assessment of the health impacts. We have the EPA involved. We have other studies at other universities going on. Why we need to have one more study is beyond me. But what's even more concerning about this particular bill is the fact that the language of the bill is too broad. It doesn't specify high-volume horizontal fracking. What it's doing is impacting the permitting for any kind of gas extraction, which, quite frankly, up in my part of the state, is still a very viable opportunity for people. I've got 32 wells in my district last year. They're doing well. I've talked to the vast majority of these well owners. They have not had problems. Why we would structure a bill that would be so broad that would impact those wells, it makes no sense to me. So while the sponsor has recommended that we can do a clarification, I think what makes a lot more sense and what the people of the state would appreciate is if we finally pass a bill that is in its proper form. For us to pass a bill now and then go back and fix it doesn't say much about our ability here as a state legislature. So please, I can't tell you how much I'm disappointed that this bill is even coming up, and I recommend a no vote for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corwin. Can we settle down the House a little? When we're in debate, I do not want large groups coming in and out of the room. When debate is over, we can have visitors. But until that time, we have to give the members respect. They're on the floor. They're talking. We are interested in their observations, their questions, and their answers. So we do not need all that noise and hubbub in the back, please. Thank you. Mr. Katz. Mr. Katz. 1 minute, Mr. Katz. These gentlemen are moving from behind you so that we can get your attention.
All right, good enough. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Katz.
You know, every year that I've been here now, this is my second term, around this time and for the first 2 months that we're here, you've all gone through this. We have the groups that come in relative to the budget, the special interest groups that either the budget has cut money or that it's being kept where it is and they need more. And for me, it's been like a Mad Lib game. Those are as old as I am will remember this game where you come up with nouns or verbs and then they give you the entire story, and it's funny because you've put in ridiculous nouns and verbs in the story. Well, here's how our story goes here. Here's how the Mad Lib story goes here. Hi, we're from underline, such and such a group. I know that money is tight and the budget, we don't have much money. But if you cut us right now, or if you don't give us more, or if you don't return what we have, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and it's going to cost the state more in the long run. Okay? 10 times a day. I get that, and I'm sure you all get that. And my answer to them is always the same. Okay, we've got a budget this year of $142 billion. Okay? And just like with an allowance, okay, Johnny, here's your $142 billion. Don't spend it all in one place. I say to them, okay, I'll give you exactly what you want. You tell me where we're going to take it from. Okay? because this is all we've got. New York is very unique in that it has, along with California, the highest social service requirement in the country. We have no money. Where are we going to get more money to pay for these services? Maybe from middle-class tax increases? Or maybe we'll mulct the millionaires a little more. Okay? We have in front of us here the opportunity for a windfall for our state. Billions of dollars, tens of thousands of jobs, especially in the place that the governor is telling us we need jobs the most, which is in upstate New York. You have got hydrofracking studies done on a national level to the point where there are 48 states out of 50 that allow hydrofracking, including some states that are far more environmentally sensitive and quote-unquote responsible than us. We've got Democratic John Hickenlooper in Colorado. We've got fracking there. You have got Governor Ed Rendell of the state of Pennsylvania, a Democrat, a past chairman of the Democratic National Committee, who has seen the benefits of hydrofracking for his state to the tune of about $1 billion of revenue for the state and tens of thousands of jobs. He publicly said to Governor Cuomo in the last couple of months, if you don't begin hydrofracking, you're crazy. But Ed Rendell, he's certainly some sort of a right-wing, go for the money greed guy, right? We've had DEC reports. We now have Dr. Perena Goma at the University of Stony Brook, of SUNY Stony Brook, who has now formed a corporation because she's come up with a process for extracting the toluene, the oils, and the chemicals out of the solvents of the hydrofracking. We now have biodegradable solvents that go in. We can make the water clean again. How many obstacles are you going to put in our way here in New York? What more do you need? This can be done responsibly. Here in New York, there is the technology to do so. It is our job to oversee that it be done responsibly, be done in an environmentally sensitive and responsible manner, which can be done now with the technology that's available. Hell, Dr. Gauma is going to be getting millions and millions of dollars of revenue for the SUNY and the New York State just from the process that she has come up with. I ask you, we are supposed, as Assemblywoman Corwin said, New York is supposed to be open for business. In what way are we open for business? You tell me how we're going to get revenue, real revenue, for our state that is going to be able to cover all the social services that are required here? How? New York open for business? The most heavily regulated, heavily unionized, and now you're trying to make the highest minimum wage in the country, second highest, I'm sorry, Assemblyman Wright, second highest in the nation, but we're open for business, but no, we don't want to have any sources of revenue that might actually bring in billions of dollars without the scare tactics that I continually hear from environmentalists. I have environmental creds, and I have them plenty. And I tell you, we can do this responsibly. Yes, it might cost the companies a couple more dollars to do it in the way that we demand it being done here in New York. But there's enough profits for them to be able to acquiesce and for us to be the beacon on the hill for how it's done properly. Give it a chance. We need the money. It can be done responsibly. Just look currently at the technologies available. We can do this. We need it desperately. We need jobs in upstate. We need the revenue to support all the things that you want done. all the things that the groups that come into my office say we need. And God knows we need this money. We need the windfall so that we can outstrip the requirements of the social services, so that we can actually be solvent again, so that we can be on the road to actually being able to give you all exactly what you want, exactly what you need, because we will have another $1 billion to offer us. I ask in the name of responsibility to our state that we give this a try, that we use the current technologies available to do this environmentally sensitively, and that we, yes, actually create jobs by the thousands and bring in a new source of revenue for our desperate needs by doing hydrofracking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Mr. Gottfried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's hard to overstate the peril to communities all across New York State in hydrofracking. Peril to the survival of communities, peril to the destruction of rural areas, of recreational areas, of the jobs that thrive from our farming communities, the jobs that thrive on tourism, basic things like people being able to drink clean water and breathe clear air and have roadways that are not clogged with astonishing amounts of trucks bringing chemicals in and chemicals out and dealing with wastewater. All of that is at stake in hydrofracking. And yes, perhaps we could sacrifice whole swaths of New York State and turn them into industrial sites for hydrofracking and make some money out of it. But think of what we would be destroying in order to achieve that. All of our parks, I suppose, could be ripped up and torn into glue factories or other industrial facilities. And yeah, we could probably get tax revenue out of that. I don't know anybody in this chamber who would recommend that. So there's an enormous amount at stake in getting this right. I personally believe that there is no way to do high-density, horizontal hydrofracking in this state in a way that protects the public health and protects the values of our communities. But the fact that I'm convinced of that is really not enough. We ought to be making this judgment on the basis of really good and thorough science. And I want to congratulate Bob Sweeney for producing a thoughtful and careful and sensible piece of legislation on this topic. I wouldn't expect anything else from Bob Sweeney, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't commend him for producing such a result. You know, when you've got such powerful economic interests trying to influence the outcome and such fiercely contending political forces trying to affect the outcome, I think it makes really good sense to do as this bill does, and that is to turn to a reliable, public, but independent source of information and analysis and professional expertise, such as the SUNY School of Public Health. And that's exactly what this bill does. And I think considering how much is at stake, it's enormously important and really sensible that this bill turns to the SUNY School of Public Health and asks them to do this analysis. This analysis is going to take some time, and no, the kind of analysis that is really needed here has not been done. It takes time, and it takes professionalism, and it takes independence, and that is what this bill will provide for us on this extraordinarily important topic. This is I think one of the most critically important issues facing all New Yorkers, and I think the sooner we can get this bill passed and signed into law, the better we will all be.
Thank you, Mr. Gottfried. Mr. Steck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Will you yield, Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Steck.
I, too, shared some of the concerns previously discussed by Member Corwin. But just to be clear, so the intent of this bill is not to affect current practiced and permitted the thousands of low volume or vertical wells or other gas extraction that's occurring in the state. Is that correct?
Outside of the Marcellus and Utica shales, yes.
All right. And am I correct that I heard you say that you'd be willing to clarify the bill? Or if
yeah, let me clarify. It's not because I see a defect in the bill or that it needs to be fixed, but if it would make other people feel more comfortable, sure.
Okay. And does this bill have a Senate sponsor? Same as?
No, not at the moment.
All right,
There have been expressions of interest from several senators.
All right, thank you. On the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Steck.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before coming to this chamber, I served as a local town supervisor for many years in the Adirondack Park. In fact, my father's a retired New York State Forest Ranger, so literally from the time I was born, DEC put food on the table. And now I'm the ranking member on the Environmental Conservation Committee. But as a town supervisor for almost a decade, I had a lot of experience with the Department of Environmental Conservation in my community, in my county, at home. Likewise, as a local elected official, I had a lot of contact, a lot of dealings with Department of Health. But more importantly than those contacts I had with DEC and DOH, I had a lot of contact with the people, their customers, their consumers that used their services, that had to go through their processes. So based on my entire life experience, the point I'd like to make is DEC and DOH are not a bunch of cowboys, not interested with the health, not interested in the welfare and protecting the interests of the public or the environment. Quite the contrary. My experience has been that they've been very hawkish on those issues. So I just get the strong sense here that after almost 5 years of study on this, and I certainly it would encourage a deliberate process. I think a deliberate process in government is good. I can think of, since I've been here, one notable exception to a very thorough, deliberate process. But in the interest of a deliberate process, I think we need to keep our eye on the ball, that we do have other issues at stake here. We have a struggling upstate economy. Yesterday we spent a great deal of time talking about raising people up and increasing the minimum wage and the compassion in trying to improve people's standing in the world. Clearly, this is a jobs issue. This is a jobs issue important in upstate New York. It's an issue that we have long experience. I think you're going to be hearing from other members shortly here that will tell you that there are thousands of active fracking wells in the state already that have been here for decades that we have a good positive experience with. So I don't think anyone's trying to wade into this issue unprepared or with disdain or disregard for the environment. But I get the strong impression that what the goal is, time is going to be an issue. The window will close on this issue, and perhaps regardless of what we find out from the study, it may be too late. So I think that should be a factor, and I don't think that, I think we should base our decision on science, but we should base our decision on science and not stall tactics. And I get the strong impression that there are some that would like to kick this can down the road a little farther so that we avoid making a hard and important decision here today. I really think that would be a disservice certainly to the residents of the state, the taxpayers of the state. We need to make sure that we're keeping our eye on all the issues here and not just the concerns of some. Thank you.
Mr. Englebright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill, there are few issues that are before us that have a greater potential impact, both negative and positive, than this one. But the potential negative impacts, as we have gone through this 4 years now of investigation, have revealed increasingly caution flags. This is a relatively new technology in the way that it's practiced, and there is still not very much scientific literature regarding the health effects. During these several years, however, we have seen some studies that have come forward that really cause us a great deal of concern. Also experiences from neighboring states that cause us to really be very, very concerned. And I believe that it's important for us to really make the right decision based upon objective third-party validation and recommendations. That's exactly what Chairman Sweeney has been pushing for, and I really think it's important to note that his approach through the discovery process of numerous hearings is as good as we have ever seen in terms of a discovery process leading toward a major policy decision. I tip my hat to Chairman Sweeney for his patience, his thoroughness, and his determination to ferret out the truth on an issue that really does not yet have a elaborate or voluminous record of research. So it's appropriate that we have a chance to see experts in the public health field weigh in on this before we make a decision that could have catastrophic effects. Let me give a couple of examples. 4 years ago, there were many who thought that the brine brought up from these wells should be spread on local roads as a way to hold down icing during the winter. We now have learned through the hearings that Chairman Sweeney has put forward that in many cases the brines are radioactive, and you're putting radioactive waste basically into your local roadways and streams. This is not desirable. This is very problematic. We've also heard from individuals who pointed out that there has been a very serious problem of homeowners not being able to get mortgages or not being able to sell their properties because of some of the perceived health problems associated with areas that have undergone drilling using the high-volume hydrofracking horizontal well drilling technology. In fact, we've seen some publications come out pointing to this as a meaningful problem. We've heard in the debate earlier that there is a point of view that we are seeing gas companies becoming discouraged because of the thoughtful process that New York is taking. I would point out that in the last 4 years, the price of gas on the market has gone down 75%. And that is what is causing many of the potential investors into this from the industrial side to take another look because it's just not economically as profitable. 3/4 or more of a drop in market value certainly shows how volatile this market is and how very difficult it is to be predictive in any part of this. An underlying problem in this is what to do with the hydrofracking fluid. In our climate, it rains almost every day, every 24-hour period, there's rain. So if you try to store hydrofracking fluid in an open pit, which is common industry practice, rain will cause flooding of the pit and displacement of the hydrofracking fluid. That may not be a problem in Oklahoma or Texas, where they have a climate that is more desert-like. But here, it's a real problem and a disposal issue for the hydrofracking fluid is something that Chairman Sweeney's hearings has revealed to be a persistent and nagging problem that we have not seen anyone propose a meaningful solution for. The bill before us calls for additional thoughtfulness. I think it's appropriate that we be very cautious. You know, I chaired the Committee on Tourism for a number of years. Tourism and agriculture are potentially the sacrificial victims of our potential headlong rush into changing the land use practices over large parts of the southern tier in central New York. That would be a shame because those are our two largest industries. It would be a shame if in the name of searching for jobs, which may be in fact mostly given to wildcatters from out of state, that we displace local apple festivals and grape festivals and farmers markets and turn off the predictable flow of tourists into our beautiful state. So this is an issue that deserves the type of thoughtfulness that the bill calls for. I compliment both Chairman Sweeney and Chairman Gottfried and the Speaker for putting the bill forward, and I urge my colleagues to support it with their vote.
Thank you, Mr. Englebright. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you. Would the Speaker yield?
Will you yield, Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Hold on 1 minute. Can we have some quiet, please? People settle down. If you are visiting, please take a seat. Members. Go ahead, Mr. Sweeney.
Mr. Sweeney, I note that your bill starts out and bans the issuance of permits for drilling of a well for natural gas extraction in low permeability natural gas pools, and then you say such as Marcellus and Utica. We talked about this a little bit before. Was it your intent to include low permeability natural gas pools that would involve, for example, the Medina Formation, low permeability natural gas?
They're not included in this bill.
Is there anything in the language of the bill that indicates that the low permeability Medina fields are not included?
No, it's not specified in that way.
Is there anything in this bill that precludes the low permeability Perrysburg formations?
There's I don't know how far you're taking this, but the definition is the definition.
Well, this definition, wouldn't you agree, would include all low permeability natural gas fields in New York State?
Outside of the Marcellus and the Utica, they are very small and they're few and far between.
Well, are you aware that there are 6,818 wells as of the latest DEC report in the Medina Formation?
DEC has not indicated to us that there is any significant number of wells outside of a relative handful that would be affected by the definition in this bill.
Well, I'm referring to the 2010 DEC Oil, Gas, and Mineral Resources Annual Report, and they indicated that there are 6,000, almost 7,000 wells as of 2010 in the Medallion Formation. There's another 1,000 wells in the Perrysburg Formation. And I would assume, if I'm not mistaken, that maybe you can clarify the Black River Formation. There's only 120 wells in the Black River Formation, but it's very highly productive. Is there anything that removes the Black River low permeability natural gas formations from your definition of a low permeability natural gas?
Yes, that and others that you have mentioned, like the Medina, are either sandstone formations or they are other types of formations that do not meet the definition of this bill.
And why are those low permeability gas formations not within your definition of low permeability? I don't want to belabor it, but as an attorney, we tend to read low permeability such as, and the word such as means including but not limited to. Did you mean to say not such as, but limited to?
No. And the answer to your question is that we base this on information received from the DEC. They tell us that those pools that you are referring to are not low permeability shale formations.
Well, then why do we hydrofrack all those formations?
There is not high volume hydrofracking that has taken place in those formations.
But all those wells are hydrofracked, aren't they?
Well, there's a lot of wells that are hydrofracked. Some water wells are hydrofracked, but it's a different type of hydrofracking, not meeting the definition of high-volume horizontal hydrofracking, which is the purpose of this bill.
Is your bill limited anywhere in its language to high-volume hydrofracking? Because I looked at the bill and I didn't see any reference at all to high-volume hydrofracking.
Well, I think you may find it in the health impact assessment portion of the bill.
Well, I'm referring specifically to the moratorium portion. Is there anything in the moratorium portion that relates to high-volume hydrofracking?
That relates to drilling in low-permeability natural gas pools, and DEC tells us that the specific formations you have mentioned don't meet this definition.
So it was your intent that when you used the word such as, you really meant limited to?
No, because there are around the state, there are a couple, I think it's fair to say, very small pools that may or may not be drilled now at all. We think that they're not being drilled. And so we meant that we wanted to include them in it also. But the ones that you have specifically mentioned, DEC tells us, don't meet this definition. They are sandstone formations or there are other types of pools that don't meet this definition.
Why is it that you believe that the hydrofracking that has been going on now, by the way, for about 60 years in New York State, involving the other low permeability natural gas fields, are safe and should not be covered by this moratorium?
Because that's not the type of drilling that's under consideration right now by DEC and the Department of Health. And we are really directing ourselves to the process that is currently underway that deals with the high-volume horizontal hydrofracking, on which there is not very much information and no health impact assessment that has ever been done specific to New York.
And so it's your view, then, that the low-volume hydrofracking that's been going on in the state for decades is relatively safe and well-known and does not need to be the subject of a moratorium?
No, I'm saying it's just not the subject of this legislation.
Is it subject to any other moratorium legislation that you propose?
No.
The latest data I have is from the DEC's 2010 annual report. They indicated that they had issued 152 permits, natural gas permits, and 120 wells were completed. Do you have any more recent data as to the number of permits that have been issued?
That's the same number we got from them, actually.
And what they reported in their report is that the hydrofracked wells that we currently have, which number in the thousands and thousands, currently produce about 35.9 billion cubic feet. Is that your understanding as well?
I don't have that information.
And they indicated that the state itself received substantial revenues. They had estimated $1.4 million in 2010. Do you know how much the state is receiving in revenues now from hydrofracked wells?
There is no revenue being received from horizontal high-volume hydrofracking in New York State because it's not taking place.
And that's because the DEC hasn't issued any permits pending their review, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, the DEC hasn't issued any permits for those types of wells for the last 4 years? 5 years?
Right.
4 or 5 years?
Yeah.
And
well, that technology is relatively new, and it was only when there was an approach made about getting permits by the industry, about getting permits in New York State for that type of drilling, that DEC undertook what is essentially an update of a very old document to take into account this new type of drilling.
Are you aware of how many comments the DEC has reviewed as part of its 4 to 5 year review that it's currently undergoing?
Well, I don't know how many they've reviewed, but they've received probably coming close to 100,000.
About 100,000. And of those 100,000, do you have an estimate of how many of them relate to the health effects of hydrofracking?
They haven't. I don't think that information is publicly available.
And you don't, but you would agree that a substantial number, probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of those comments relate to the potential health effects of hydrofracking?
I would guess, because I would just base that on what I hear. And there is not a week that goes by that I don't receive from some village or a town a copy of a ordinance that they have passed banning hydrofracking in their community or asking us to ban hydrofracking statewide. And almost always their reason for doing so is based on health factors or, let's call it, fear of the unknown.
Is it your position that the DEC experts that have been reviewing this for the last 4 or 5 years and have gone over these 100,000 comments are incapable of assessing the environmental impact of high-volume hydrofracking? Is that why you believe we need a moratorium, a statutory moratorium?
No, they're not performing any type of health impact assessment. Nobody is. Not even the effort that is underway in the collaboration between the DEC and the DOH is a health impact assessment. Nobody is doing what this bill proposes to do, and that's the problem. And, allow me to point out that we in this House have been talking about this issue as an issue for years. We put in our one-house budget last year funding for a health impact assessment. We passed a bill on this floor, which is part 2 of this bill. It's identical, asking for a health impact assessment, and those things haven't happened. And that's why, for those who say, well, this is dragging on and you're just prolonging, well, it's because these things that we have been talking about for years and that the public has been coming to us and talking about in all the multiple hearings that we've done on this subject over the years, there is nothing that has gotten more attention than health issues, and that has not been addressed either by the DEC or by the DOH under the current process.
Are you concerned that absent a statutory moratorium, Governor Cuomo will move forward with hydrofracking without evaluating the health effects of this process?
Well, since there is no health impact assessment that is underway, we think the reason for the moratorium, one of the reasons for the moratorium, is certainly to allow time for that process to take place. And that's the amount of time that we think is needed, but it's also consistent with what the Commissioner of Health said last month. He referred to 3 other studies which are also underway or about to get underway, which will probably not be completed until 2015 either. So I think it's all consistent in terms of the timing.
In any of your communications with the DEC, did the DEC Commissioner or any of his staff indicate that they intended to proceed forward with the issuance of permits even without checking the health impacts or the environmental ramifications?
Well, at a hearing, at one of the hearings that was done, when we asked the Commissioner of DEC directly whether they intended to undertake a health impact assessment, his response was no. And in terms of whether permits are going to be issued or when they might be issued, we certainly haven't gotten any date from them as to when they might be making a decision, nor do we have any indication from them as to what the ultimate decision might be. So I think the lack of information from both DEC and DOH, the lack of transparency in this collaboration between the two agencies is also a factor in considering legislation like this.
Well, I'm sure you share my concern over the economy of the state, both in terms of employment opportunities, in terms of lower utility rates that would likely be impacted by additional natural gas production. I'm sure you're concerned, as I am, with the revenue that landowners would get and local businesses would receive as a result of increase. In fact, some of the estimates indicate that allowing hydrofracking to occur in just the southern tier would have a larger financial impact than raising the minimum wage by 24%, which we discussed yesterday. In fact, some of the estimates have the economic impact at well over $1 billion. Are you aware of those estimates in terms of the economic impact per year that would occur if we allow this hydrofracking to occur in an environmentally sensitive and appropriate manner?
If there is such a thing. Let me tell you, the most interesting thing about this whole issue to me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sweeney. I apologize for interrupting. My question related to the economic impact. Do you have?
I know. I heard your question, and I'm attempting to answer it.
Thank you. Thank you.
The most interesting thing about this issue to me over the years has been the way that it has changed, and the fact that as time has gone by, we learn more and more about claims made on both sides of the issue, for and against. You know, I think when this subject first came up, and almost nobody, I think maybe you because of the area of the state that you live in and the history of drilling in that area, but most of us probably hadn't heard an awful lot about horizontal hydrofracking and the economic benefits or the downside or health issues or any of the other things that have arrived as issues for us over the years. But as time has gone by and we have learned, we have found that an awful lot of what was put forward, such as the purported economic benefits, is in fact not the case. And I'm not going to dwell on that right now because that's not really the purpose of this bill. This bill deals with, because to me, the most important thing before we talk about anything else is to make sure that the health and public safety is taken care of. And until we can be sure that all of the health implications of hydrofracking are, I don't think that we are in a position to say yes or no. But let me tell you one thing that actually deals with both issues, with health and with the economy. And this is an Associated Press article from just this past January about a hospital in Pennsylvania, right next door to us, in an area where there has been a lot of drilling recently. And it's interesting because it deals with both health and it deals with the economy. And this hospital, the article is about the fact that this hospital announced its first operating loss in many years, an operating loss of $770,000 while providing more than $3 million in care to people unable to pay in its most recent fiscal year. The most significant reason for this, according to the CEO of the hospital, is the influx of gas industry personnel who lack insurance. So you want to talk about an economic issue tied to health? Here's a hospital that's going under because so many of the gas drilling employees don't have health insurance and they go to their hospital and they don't have money to pay the bill. And the hospital has to pay it. So if you're interested in the economy and I'm interested in health, here's one for you.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Mr. Goodell, your time has elapsed. You can come back for a second if you so like.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Right. And thank you, Mr. Sweeney.
Ms. Lifton.
On the bill, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend my colleague, Mr. Sweeney, and I want to thank the Speaker for his strong support here as well on this very important moratorium bill. I've been studying this issue of high-volume hydrofracking for 4.5 years now. And the longer I've studied it, and I've also gone to Pennsylvania twice to meet with people, to look at a well pad and all of that, the more concerned I've become over that 4.5 years about the downsides of this industry. There are many crucial issues that need greater scrutiny. Wastewater treatment and disposal, so far no answer, no resolution to that problem. the effects of fugitive methane on climate change, very worrisome data out of Cornell, and now 3 other studies that back up that original data on the powerful impact of methane gas on climate change. And very, very importantly, of course, the issue of public health. Everywhere high-volume hydrofracking has happened, people have reported illnesses post-fracking, presumably due to polluted air and polluted water. When I went down to Pennsylvania over 2 days and met with many people there told me that they had welcomed the industry into their towns. They had thought, indeed, that it was all the things my colleague on the other side of the aisle has been saying, all these wonderful things, that it's going to help our economy and provide good jobs, clean energy, and so on. But there are many people in Pennsylvania now feeling deep, deep regret as their water is contaminated and their health is hurt. In one county alone, in Washington County near Pittsburgh, 400 families have been having water delivered to them for 2 years. And there are many other instances all over Pennsylvania, just to the south of us. One of the most troubling things that's developed over the last couple of years it happened in relation to Pennsylvania Law 13 that was passed, I believe, in 2011, which is essentially, and part of that law, besides dealing with local zoning issues in Pennsylvania, part of that law is what's being termed a gag order on doctors, telling doctors that if they're treating patients with fracking, seemingly fracking-related illnesses, they are not to, they have to get special permission to get information from the industry about the chemicals, and they are not to share that information. One doctor, I'm going to read a little bit from a filing in Pennsylvania court from a Dr. Kahn. It's very interesting reading. His suit says, in part, they seek a declaration of Article 13 as an unconstitutional special law in violation of Article 3, Section 32 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, which restricts health professionals' ability to receive and disclose critical diagnostic information when dealing solely with information deemed proprietary by the natural gas industry. His filing goes on, Dr. Kahn's filing in the Pennsylvania court goes on to say the General Assembly has singled out the natural gas industry for special treatment and protection not afforded any other industry. And he quotes from the law, Pennsylvania Law 13, Pennsylvania Act 13. If a health professional deems that a medical emergency exists and the specific identity and the amount of any chemicals claimed to be a trade secret or confidential proprietary information are necessary for emergency treatment, the vendor, service provider, or operator shall immediately disclose the information to the health professional upon a verbal acknowledgement by the health professional that the information may not be used for purposes other than the health needs asserted, and that the health professional shall maintain the information as confidential. The vendor, service provider, or operator may request, and the health professional shall provide, upon request, a written statement of need and a confidentiality agreement from the health professional as soon as circumstances permit, in conformance with the regulations promulgated under this chapter. Basically, a very restrictive provision on doctors in Pennsylvania around fracking emergencies. The filing goes on to say, it is critically imperative, this doctor is saying, when performing a differential etiology, that a doctor has complete information regarding all of the patient's past medical, social, occupational, and environment exposure history to properly determine the cause or source of the patient's illness or disease. He goes on, as such, without complete information, such as full chemical exposure history, a doctor could very easily, improperly diagnose and treat a patient, making his or her illness worse, not better, and thus opening himself or herself up to a claim of medical malpractice. And quickly to finish this, moreover, Act 13 only requires the dissemination of trade secret or proprietary chemical information from the industry in emergency situations. This restriction, again, forces doctors to practice irresponsible and dangerous medicine. And lastly, as such, with respect to human medical conditions potentially related to or caused by exposure to chemicals deemed trade secrets or proprietary by the natural gas industry, the Pennsylvania General Assembly has decreed that there will be no body, this is crucial, the Pennsylvania General Assembly has decreed that there will be no body of medical knowledge developed through the interchange of ideas between health professionals. Health professionals have no right to access such trade secrets or proprietary information in a non-emergency situation, and that health professionals are not permitted to use any knowledge or experience they have gained in treating one patient exposed to such substance to diagnose and assist another patient in a similar situation. That is what Dr. Kahn is saying in a filing to a Pennsylvania court. To me, that this gag order on doctors in this Pennsylvania law is a very, very troubling thing. Why would the natural gas industry want to lobby, as they obviously did, the state of Pennsylvania to gag doctors? And as I said in another public setting recently, I'm pretty sure that it wasn't the residents, the citizens of the state of Pennsylvania who lobbied their legislature to gag their doctors. This was the industry that lobbied the legislature and the governor. And so this, to me, is one of the most troubling and shocking things. The industry says it's operating safely. The industry says there's no problem. But they don't want doctors sharing information and, heaven forbid, in any way publicly disclosing information that they might find to be a matter of public and human health. That is deeply, deeply troubling. We should approach this risky, heavy industry with the greatest of caution. No amount of money can compensate for lost water or lost health. And interestingly enough, again, responding to one of my colleagues across the aisle, you know, it's interesting that the capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, is in bankruptcy. The capital of this state, with money presumably flowing in at a great pace, has filed for bankruptcy. So you've got to wonder about that. People I talked to with contaminated water in Pennsylvania, here they had gas coming off their property, but they had no money flowing into them. They weren't benefiting from the profits of this industry. So no amount of money can compensate. It's also clearly not a benefit to the economy. Again, Susan Christofferson's work has shown everywhere the industry has gone around the country, she's studied it county by county, across the country, and in New York State in relation to conventional fracking, conventional drilling, their economy is worse off than the economies of the counties around them. And they are worse off than their own economy was historically. It is not good for the economy either. I strongly urge my colleagues' support for this moratorium bill, and also, of course, for the health impact assessment that is required under this bill. It's crucial that that be done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You are welcome. Ms. Lifton, Mr. Lalor.
On the bill, Mr. Speaker?
On the bill.
Our state has been studying hydraulic fracturing for 4.5 years. That's enough time for a young New Yorker to graduate from high school, complete a bachelor's degree, start looking for a job, and realize there are limited opportunities in this state, and head out of state to find their fortunes. Because of delays in the past and the delays that this moratorium would cause, we are exporting our youngest, most ambitious, brightest, most educated young people, rather than exporting energy and reaping all the benefits. 4 years to complete an entire bachelor's degree course of study in engineering, mathematics, history, you name it. One individual can do that. Why can't an entire state with 18 million plus people, with a multi-billion-dollar budget, with agencies upon agencies, complete a definitive study of the effects of hydraulic fracturing in our state? I think the reason is we're kicking the can down the road. And every time we kick the can down the road, more economic opportunity eviscerates, and our economy becomes that much weaker. We've known for years that Pennsylvania is reaping the economic benefits of hydraulic fracturing. But just recently, in the last few weeks, the Democrat governor of the state of Illinois has gotten behind hydraulic fracturing. Everyone in this room appreciates the need for clean water and to protect our water supply. The greatest stakeholder in the New York State water supply is the mayor of New York City. Half our people live in the 5 boroughs. And Mayor Bloomberg is a cautious man. He doesn't want you to be able to go into the 7-Eleven and get a big gulp because he doesn't think it's safe. But even Mayor Bloomberg, with all his cautiousness, believes that hydraulic fracturing can be done safely here in New York State and that we should reap all the economic benefits of that process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Colton. Members, please. Visitors. Go ahead, Mr. Colton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
You know, I rise here to support this bill because I believe that while this process has gone on for 4 or 5 years now, we still have major questions that haven't been answered. And unless we start addressing those questions in an organized, independent, objective way, the frustrations that we hear on the floor from both sides will continue. And I do believe this bill that has been put together by a sponsor who is very knowledgeable on this issue gives us a new direction. Let's get an independent study done on the health impacts that this will have on the families in this state. After all these years of discussing it, of maneuvering, of talking, of supposedly studying, we still don't have an independent health study. And this is what affects the believability, the trust that people should have in government. When they read in a newspaper leaks about health studies being done using data that was prepared by one side, it raises a question of, is this really an independent study that people can trust, that is going to affect their safety and the health of their families, that they can have confidence that the decision will be a decision which will protect their health and protect the viability of the state. This bill now says, let's do an independent study. Let's have a time frame for that study. Let's designate specific areas, specific points that study should direct itself to. And let the study be done by one of the public universities, schools that we have, that New York State has as a treasure of information that can now be used to conduct such a study and give us a definitive answer one way or the other. You know, this should not be a decision which is made based upon political or ideological conclusions. There has to be a political policy decision made, but it must be based on hard, independent, scientific evidence. We, in this bill, are saying, let's get that evidence. Let's get it expeditiously, but let's get it thoroughly, so that the people that we represent will have confidence that whatever the conclusion of that study is, it will be a study upon which we can go forward, not worrying about health effects. Yes, hydrofracking has been done in Pennsylvania. And individuals and governors and other elected officials and community leaders may have their opinion. But we've heard both sides of it from Pennsylvania. We've heard of those who have said, oh, this is the greatest thing, but we've also heard horror stories. And I think that we owe it to the people of New York State before we make the political policy decision to make sure that we have done the independent scientific study, the analysis that will give our constituents, the families that we represent, confidence that our decision is based upon science and not upon anything else. So I support this bill, and I strongly urge its passage. And I think this is, finally, we are now saying, let's make a decision based on science, but let's do it, and let's not just talk about it, and let's just not go around the corners and the surfaces of it. Let's get an answer once and for all from an independent group, and then we're in a position, if it's safe, fine, let's proceed with it. But if it's not safe, let's not find out after impacts which are negative and detrimental to the families of the people of this state are felt, and then we have to undo it and pay for the damage that is done as a result of a decision that was not made on hard scientific evidence. So I rise and I support this bill because I believe it's the way to go in order to be able to make the decision that ultimately we, as representatives of the people of this state and of the families of this state, have an obligation to make based on hard scientific evidence.
Ms. Glick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't expect to change anybody's mind, so I won't belabor too many points, even though that seems to be our stock and trade. I think that the notion that we have to continue doing something that we know is bad for the climate, bad for our long-term health, bad for our long-term economic health, is to stay committed to fossil fuels. I want people in this state to have good, solid jobs, and I want them to be tied to new technologies, new ways of generating energy, and harnessing those things that are not going to continue to add to pollution. Upstate has been severely damaged repeatedly over the last 5 or 6 years by dreadful, dreadful flooding. Some of that is related to the severity of storms that's linked to climate change. And I know there are deniers out there, but at some point we have to face the fact. There are people in my district who are still out of their homes from Sandy. We've heard about the more dramatic circumstances, and our hearts go out to those folks along the beaches, but the Hudson River and the East River came in several blocks. That's never, ever happened. Not in my memory. And I've lived in that neighborhood for decades. We have to start to make that shift in many different ways. Teaching people how to do proper solar installations, wind installations, enabling agriculture to grow biomass. There are companies that are actually seeking hundreds of acres for particular types of grasses that grow fast, grow densely, and don't deplete the soil's nutrients. That's the direction we should be moving in. We should have a program that makes it possible for every dairy farmer to have solar on their barn spaces, which are large. They've done it all over Germany because it's very energy intense to have milking machines, to do the refrigeration, to keep milk. We want to help people. That is the direction we should go in, not taking the chance of poisoning the water. I have a neighbor upstate. I know a lot of you think that I'm only see the Manhattan. I only take subways, but I actually know a little bit about upstate, and a neighbor had a sign that said, "Water has kept us alive since BC." A point well taken. It was on the front of a dairy farm. We have to think of ways to help people bridge that gap, invest in people, but not put at risk the only thing that really keeps plant, animal, and human alive. You cannot live without water. And if you have an accident, there isn't a place where the oil and gas industry has ever accepted responsibility. Doesn't matter if you test the water before and you test the water after. They say it must have been something else. They don't take responsibility. We always talk about individual responsibility. Pull yourself up. They take no responsibility. And if they mess up your water supply, your land is worth nothing. So I urge you to support the notion that we think this through. And obviously, I think it's crazy to continue to use fossil fuels, but we're going to have some transition period. We should not commit ourselves further to destructive, invasive procedures that put our property values, our food shed, and our watershed at risk. New York City allegedly is going to have its watershed protected. I happen to think New York City shouldn't be the only one having their water protected. I urge a yes vote.
Mr. Cahill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield to a couple of short, quick questions? Will you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bob, first of all, I wanted to just distinguish that which this bill is calling for from that which we already have. Can you just further elucidate what the differences are between what's being sought by this bill and what Dr. Shah has told us he's in the process of investigating?
Well, actually, they haven't told us much, but what we know of it, and I would point out that although we've asked for documents from them, we've never received it, and we invited them to the last hearing we did on this subject. They declined to participate, but from what we know about what they're doing, they have retained outside scientific assistance, let's call it, to review DEC's documents and determine whether they think it may or may not be adequate in terms of addressing health issues. That's all we know about it. We don't know anything more. The difference with this bill is this bill, like last year's, calls for a true independent health impact assessment that would address very specifically the issues of concern that have arisen over the years and would be specific to New York.
Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Sweeney, if I can continue. I was at the Ways and Means hearing. I think we were both there together when Dr. Shah was offering his testimony on this specific subject. And my recollection was that he said he was actually making a very significant point that they were reviewing, not creating new investigations. Is that your understanding as well, that they were reviewing those things that already existed as opposed to going in and starting, as is described in this bill, a process of investigation that comports with scientific testing and the Center for Disease Control's whatever else you've asked for it to comport with here?
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. They're not making their own independent assessments. He did make reference in his letter to the DEC commissioner last month to 3 other studies, one by the EPA and 2 others in Pennsylvania, none of which are specific to New York and none of which will probably be completed before the time that this moratorium expires.
And Mr. Sweeney,
what exactly are you seeking to protect? The public health is a big thing. Are you trying to protect the landowners upon whose land wells might be drilled? Or what if you're not a landowner whose well, who doesn't want to, or you're a landowner who doesn't want a well drilled on your property? Are you seeking to protect them from what might happen to, say, their aquifer or their water treatment plant or half a dozen other things that could happen?
Well, a health impact assessment would take into account all of the potential health impacts to anyone and everyone throughout the state. And actually, at the hearing one of the hearings that we did on this subject that was specific to health, we had some interesting testimony from several people, scientists, who testified about how other areas of the state, beyond the specific localities where the drilling would take place, could be impacted in their health, for example, through air pollution.
And Mr. Sweeney, one final question for you. The date listed, and it's been called a 2-year moratorium, is April 15th, 2015. Is that a hard and fast date, or what if the study is done sooner and to the satisfaction of people who know what they're talking about?
No later, the study would have to be done no later than April 15th of 2015, and the moratorium would expire a month after that.
So whenever the study is done, the moratorium expires a month after that?
No, it expires on May 15th.
Expires on May 15th no matter what?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill.
You know, there's a lot of concern today being expressed about us missing the boat, about we're kicking the can down the road, we're doing things that are going to prevent us from participating in the economic boom associated with natural gas. The fact of the matter is that today, as we speak, as we stand here, natural gas is being sold to consumers for less than the cost of extraction, transmission, and delivery. That's not a sustainable model. The reason that natural gas companies are still talking about drilling is because they anticipate that someplace down the road, the cost of natural gas to people in the Northeast United States will rival that of what the cost of natural gas is, say, in Japan today. 4, 5, 6 times what we're paying here. In fact, 7 times what we're paying here today. That's what they're anticipating. When is that going to happen? No one knows. The fact of the matter is that as long as that gas is in the ground, it remains as valuable as its market when it is taken out of that ground. If it's taken out of the ground today, it's not worth much. It's not going to do much for our economy. It's going to probably be sent around the Northeast, maybe even put on boats and compressed and sent to other countries. Maybe. But not likely. That's not really an economic thing to do. The fact of the matter is that this natural gas is not going anywhere. The water that has potential to be damaged by this drilling process, that has the potential of being poisoned by the disposal process, that has the potential of being compromised by some other factor that we haven't dealt with or thought of yet, is also going to be there forever. And the hopes are that we will be able to use that water for the production of food, for whatever processing facilities we have in New York State, and they seem to be stabilizing and in some instances growing, that we'll be able to use that water to drink, that we'll be able to use that water to sustain life. The fact of the matter is we're not going to be importing water from Texas, Louisiana, and Delaware, and other places that have infiltrated their water systems with chemicals. We're not going to be taking water from Pennsylvania. We happen to have an abundant supply of clean, drinkable water in New York State. It is perhaps our greatest natural asset and deserves our protection, because the consequence of not protecting that water is devastating. The consequence of what happens to our state when there is not water that we can drink, that we cannot make food with, that we cannot use for farming and other purposes, is dire. That's an economic calamity we don't want to face. I suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, that this is not a stall. This is not kicking the can down the road. This is not avoiding the opportunity to participate in the economic bounty of fracking of natural gas if and when the time comes. Some of us in this House may indeed be against fracking. I'm not one of them. I am for clean water. I am for protecting the environment. And I'm here to tell you that I believe that the studies that are being looked at right now will not assure the people of the state of New York that we can do that successfully in this state and that we can do it safely in this state. More time is needed. Certainly more study is needed. And when those studies are completed by valid scientific processes, by people that we respect for their objectivity and their laser-like focus on this issue as it pertains to New York State, that is the time that we should open up our state to this opportunity. And then when we do so in a responsible way. I'm here to tell you that if we're going to stand up for the water for our families, for our kids, if we're going to stand up for the health, for the future of this state, this is the bill to do it with. And this is the time to act with caution, not with plowing straight ahead into something headlong just because it sounds like a good idea. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Cahill. Mr. Crouch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have debated this bill before. We've talked numerous times about the pluses and minuses of gas drilling or hydrofracking. In the course of time that we've debated this in Albany, I've taken the time, many hours actually, talking on the phone to regulatory people in Colorado, in Texas, Wyoming, Pennsylvania, and numerous times our own DEC. I'm very impressed with the regulations that we currently have. Very impressed. In Pennsylvania, they have a gas migration issue because they didn't have adequate casing requirements. They didn't require the casing to be fully cemented from the bottom all the way to the top. Similarly in Wyoming. But in Pennsylvania, they upgraded their casing requirements 2011. I think it was February 27, 2011, to be like New York State. We require full cementing of the casings. There's not been one incident that I've been able to track down of chemical contamination from the result of hydrofracking as far as the process. Matter of fact, some people that I know of have interviewed every state. And again, I personally talked to Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, and Pennsylvania officials, and I asked the question, is there any incident of water contamination from the process of hydraulic fracturing? And the answer was no. Colorado has well over 100,000 wells when I talked to them about a year and a half, 2 years ago. No incident of contamination. They had 3,000 spills that they admitted to readily because they allowed storage of fracking fluids in unlined ponds, which you couldn't do under our current regulations in New York State. They allowed storage of fluids in under-designed ponds. They didn't have a berm of containment around the well site, so you're going to have an incident, you're going to have a pipe break, and so there was no containment of the fluid that ran off the well. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, there was a pipe burst about 2 or 3 years ago. Some frac fluid ran off the well pad down into a pasture. Consequently, there was a beef herd that was quarantined for a year. I talked to Dr. David Wolfgang from Penn State University. The beef herd did have some calving issues during the course of the year. They had to do some autopsies, some necropsy tests on the organs. Not one incident of chemical contamination in any of the organs of those animals. And they came to the conclusion it was nothing to do with essentially drinking any frac fluid. They had no evidence that the animals had drank it. There was no evidence that they really had eaten any forage, but the quarantine was a matter of safety. But he said in retrospect, it was a little bit of overkill, but we didn't know for sure what we were doing. or what we were dealing with. So that herd has been released. I talked to an extension agent that deals with livestock producers in 3 of the 6 counties that have been drilling. He had no incidents. He said, I know just about all the livestock producers, all the veterinarians in those 3 counties. He said, I can cite no incidents of hair falling off the cattle, cattle dying, losing their calves, all of the horror stories that we've heard. He said, I can't find any of it. And I know just about everybody that's a producer. So a lot of this has been overblown. When I talked to the Pennsylvania Department of Health, and this is about 1.5 years ago at this point in time, they could point to no incidents of rash, respiratory illnesses, or anything like that that could be directly attributed to a population within the shadow of a well site or within a certain area. Now again, they have methane migration problems due to faulty cases. But even just 3 weeks ago, I had a person from Pennsylvania show me the sampling results of their well, and yes, there was high methane, but the chemicals that they were pointing to their well was not anything to do with hydraulic fracturing. It was iron compound, manganese compound, and again, I talked to the Pennsylvania DEP, and they reassured me that these chemicals have nothing to do with hydraulic fracturing. They are natural chemicals within the water table in that area, and so in some cases, iron levels are higher, in some cases magnesium levels are higher. I have high iron levels in my own water back at my house. We're not drilling for gas nearby, so there's no cause and effect there. So as we look at this, you know, some people say we can't have the risk. There's risk in everything that we do. And I have faith in our own DEC that we can move forward with this. We have a good track record. As a couple of my colleagues have pointed out, we've got a number of wells out, especially out in western New York, that have been hydraulically fractured. They are vertical wells, but basically the process is the same. Technology is a little bit different in the fact that you're going to use more water because you're going to have a longer pipe bore in the target area. But we have a real good record on what we've done so far. And for those that say we can't handle the risk, we shouldn't be doing this, they get in their car and they drive home, and they're willing to accept the risk that we've already been accustomed to, and that's spills with gasoline. There's about 200 gasoline tractor-trailer incidents in the United States every year that involves a spill. As a matter of fact, just north of here, a little over a month ago, was a gasoline tractor-trailer, went off the road, spilled its cargo, burned, incinerated the entire tanker. Gasoline was running down the stream, burning. And not that that's a good thing. I certainly don't condone that. But you know, it's something that we deal with. I think we have the ability to deal with things like that, and certainly what we've learned from other states, we can deal with hydraulic fracturing and gas drilling in a very positive manner. We have probably the toughest regulations in the nation right now, and it pretty much was proven out when I made my conversations to a number of the states. One of the states was in the process of upgrading their regulations, and their comment was, when we get done, we'll be like New York. So there's respect out there amongst the other regulatory people across the nation that we already have the toughest regulations, and we're in the process of upgrading them. So I'm confident that we need to move forward with this. We're already in a self-imposed moratorium by the governor and the commissioner of DEC. They've made a comment that they were not going to release anything into results of a health study in Pennsylvania. That's out there. Why we're doing this for, you know, a definite 2 years, I'm not quite sure. I hear the answers, but I'm going to put my faith in science, not political science. So I'm going to urge a yes or a no vote on this, and we defeat this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crouch. Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield to a few questions?
Will you yield, Mr. Sweeney?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
You may have to yield and turn your head a little bit, so I'm right behind you. I had some questions, Mr. Sweeney. I'm not an expert on this area, and I know you've been following it closely. I have questions about the evolution of regulations in Pennsylvania. If you could comment on that. I know when Pennsylvania first started drilling, it was professed to be a very safe activity. Industry said we can regulate ourselves. But how did the Pennsylvania regulatory system evolve over the last several years?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on that, but I do know that state of Pennsylvania, the governor in particular, had to, or he ended up, apologizing after drilling started, and there were a number of problems. He apologized for not putting in the regulatory effort or having appropriate regulations before the drilling started, and they went back through a whole other process and developed new regulations.
And was one of the concerns of Pennsylvania for a while, they allowed stream water discharge of fracking fluid. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I believe that's true.
And then they switched from stream water discharge to letting the fracking fluid go to public water treatment facilities. And from that point, they discovered elements such as barium in the Pittsburgh water supply, where that had never existed prior to that.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that, Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
And are you familiar with currently the regulations in Pennsylvania and how they now treat fracking water?
Because of existing regulations in Pennsylvania now, it's all disposed of out of state.
So they're taking the problem they create in Pennsylvania, the dirty water they create in Pennsylvania, and they're shipping it to another state?
Yes, yes. And some of it may be coming to New York.
Well, I hope that's a model that we don't undertake in New York, and I hope that we can develop laws that prevent certainly Pennsylvania's dirty frack water from ending up in our streams or in our waste disposal facilities. I had another question, Mr. Sweeney. I've heard several times in the last few months, and I've read comments about how the mayor of New York City is he's thumbs up on hydrofracking. But is hydrofracking allowed anywhere in New York City or anywhere near the New York City watershed?
Well, it wouldn't take place in New York City, and it would not be allowed. Well, presumably, when the regulations are out, it won't be allowed near the watershed. New York City has been very emphatic in its desire to keep hydrofracking well away from both the watershed and all of the infrastructure, the pipelines and everything else that come into the city from the watershed because of concerns they have about potential damage to the infrastructure or pollution of the watershed.
It almost sounds like we're on the verge of proposing an inequitable system of some water supplies in New York City are more safe and more valuable than other supplies in New York State?
Well, that issue has been raised by people in other areas of the state, yes.
Certainly, I live on the shores of Lake Erie, and as you know, the Great Lakes comprise about 20% of the whole world's fresh water. If there's going to be regulations put in place to make sure reservoirs that feed New York City or actually New York City people drink from are safe, wouldn't it make sense to make sure that 20% of the world's fresh water are also kept safe and treated at the same level?
Well, clearly, it is important and necessary that whatever regulations are eventually developed ensure that all drinking water sources are more than adequately protected.
And I would hope that all drinking water sources in New York State are treated equally?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. On the bill.
On the bill.
Most people know I'm from Buffalo, and we have a great legacy in Buffalo from our industrial past. What most people don't realize is our industrial past, it didn't last that long. We had a few generations, 2 generations of very successful steel plants, smelting operations, foundries. But you know what we have now? We have brownfields. We have brownfields by the thousands of the acres. And you know who's paying to clean up those brownfields? Every citizen of New York State. So we had some periods of real economic boom. But if you measure out over the years the economic benefit versus the economic detriment of what we're all paying to clean up now, It's starting not to balance out anymore. The city where I grew up, right adjacent to Buffalo, New York, in Lackawanna, we have 1,000 acres of lakefront property right now that cannot be built on, cannot be made into a park, and nothing can be done with that because for 2 generations, there was a steel plant there. Well, there is no more Bethlehem Steel. There's no legacy corporation to go after. Bethlehem Steel, their stockholders, the employees of that corporation during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they're gone. But we, the taxpayers, are expected to foot the bill. And you know what else we're footing the bill for? Is that because of lax regulations. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball. At one point, we thought it was fine to discharge dirty water right into Lake Erie. We did that for generations. Then we all paid to clean up Lake Erie. We've had an evolving system of OSHA regulations and safety regulations, but we have tens of thousands of people in my community whose lives were cut short because of cancer. They got the cancer from working at the steel plant or living near the steel plant. And you know who's paying out the legacy claims right now for the people whose lives were cut short or people whose lives were severely limited? The federal government's paying for those claims because there is no corporation to go after. So my concerns on fracking is we have to look in the long term. And long term doesn't mean 10 years, doesn't mean 20 years. It means 100 years. One of the largest problems facing the Pennsylvania water supply right now is not fracking, but it's coal mines that have been closed down for 50 years. Those coal mines are now leaching acid into streams and lakes all over Pennsylvania. And the Pennsylvania taxpayers have to pay more to pull that water out of the streams and clean them. And what are they paying for? They're paying for the legacy cost of industry. Natural gas exploration is undoubtedly an industry, and we need to look very long term before we head headlong into more exploration. But because we don't want is in 2063 us standing here, not any of us probably, but a next generation standing here saying, how are we going to clean up the mess that the people made back in 2013? That's what we need to avoid. That's why I'm supportive of the long-term health study. We need to know what we're doing because, mark my words, we all like the profits now, but none of us like it when we have to pay to clean up the mess that our last generation made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Friend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spoke on this bill 2 years ago when it came up. And as I spoke then, and I think everybody in the chamber appreciates that we want the science to lead the day. Unfortunately, that's not what this body's about. There isn't anybody with the training or the expertise, the experience sitting in this body on a day-to-day basis to be able to assess this. We can take the information, we can accumulate it, we can put it together, but that's not what we were elected to do. What we were elected to do was to oversee the departments. And 2 years ago, we had the Department of Environmental Conservation, and we were second-guessing them at that point. And that was my point. Today, we've added in the Department of Health. And I think that brings in the serious question from this bill. We all want this done safely. We don't want our water contaminated. It's a great resource that we all sit upon. Unfortunately, if the DEC is not doing their job, if the Department of Health aren't doing their job, why are they still employed? Why are they still working for the people of this state? Do we have the wrong people employed in those two departments? Do we need more people there? Do we need different people there? Or is the governor's office stepping in and playing politics? Is he keeping those two departments from doing their job? This study is appropriate. The idea to go forward and have a scientific background, scientifically based study is something that should be out there. And the question that we're all talking about is, has it been done? Has it been done appropriately? Again, these are two things that both the DEC and the Department of Health should be able to answer for us. And why haven't they? Or have they, and has that information not been provided to this body? And who can step into that position to prevent that information from coming to us? The only person that can do that is the governor. How come he's not making that push? That's really what we need to have answered. We can't assess the science. It's a very complex field. I believe that I'm the only person sitting in this body that has a PhD in chemistry. I know better than to stick my foot into their assessments. Again, that's why we have the Department of Environmental Conservation. We need to hire the best and the brightest, the experts, to go out there and work for the people of this state. So I think we need to look at this picture, take it serious, and I think we all are. But we need to look at the bigger picture also and ask what's happening in those two commissions, in the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Department of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Friend. Mr. Garbarino.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield? The sponsor.
Thank you.
The sponsor will yield, Mr. Garbarino.
I just have a few questions. As to the assessment review by the School of Public Health, do we have a projected cost for that assessment?
No, we believe it can be done within the SUNY budget. They have the resources already.
Have they said they have the resources? They're willing to cover
We
the
believe
cost?
they have the resources.
But have they said they have the resources?
I don't know if they said it quite that way, but we know they have the resources.
All right.
So we do the budget. We know they have the resources.
But do you have a projected cost, or do they have a projected cost of what they think?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. I know last year, I believe last year in last year's budget there was $100,000 set aside for a similar assessment review.
That's correct.
Which was taken out.
Yes.
Would it be safe to say that's an accurate assessment of?
Somewhere in that range.
Is there any? So they think they can. Do they believe that they'll be taking the money away from other parts of the SUNY budget, or is this going to come from new funds?
No, we believe that they have the resources within their existing budget. It's a very large budget.
Okay, so you don't believe that this bill will cost the money to be taken from other programs such as professors or student activities to cover?
No,
the cost?
absolutely not.
Okay. If that does become the case, is there another option here to fund this assessment?
Well, we're convinced that that's not the case. But, you never know. The budget is coming up, and it may be decided that it would be appropriate to provide some funding for that, too.
All right. If SUNY does come out and say they can't afford this in their current budget, is there another thing in place to provide the funds?
Well, this bill has been around for well over a year, and they have never said that to us.
But they haven't said they couldn't.
Well, they're aware of the bill.
Okay. My only concern is that if the bill does pass and then they can't fund, that there is another way to fund this assessment, and it doesn't seem there is another way yet. So.
Well, I believe in planning ahead, but I don't believe in creating problems ahead. I have no reason to think there's any problem with this.
Okay, but if a problem does arise due to SUNY not being able,
we will certainly deal with it appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Scartatos.
Mr. Speaker, briefly on the bill.
On the bill, Mr. Scartatos.
Mr. Speaker.
1 minute. Mr. Scartatos, 1 minute. Sergeant of Arms, will you ask those groups in the back that are meeting to be quiet or move under the eave a little bit? We can hear them. They're raising the level. They're all together. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Scartatos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, maybe we are and maybe we are not here by accident of fate or some intelligent design. But what we are contemplating here today is the destruction of the very elements that gave rise to life: water, soil, air. Mr. Speaker, what's good? What is good about a job if I can't quench my thirst with a clean glass of water? You see, I was born on an island where there was no water, no trees, no life, and no future. So here I am. When I first laid eyes on the mighty Hudson River, I couldn't wait to write to my father back home and tell him that I had found the promised land. Of course, it was years later when I discovered that this mighty river that helped to build the Empire State, the abuse that he had sustained, can we really continue to play a Russian roulette with a resources that have the potential to destroy life as we know it? Can we really be that naive? When are we going to recognize that there is no future for us as long as we depend on finite resources that also have the ability to destroy the very life created by them? All we are doing is postponing the inevitable. Now that's really kicking the can down the road, or to a road where there is no end. Now, ideas and new technologies can lead us to new resources, and they do. In 1963, a communication satellite orbiting 24,000 miles above the Earth's atmosphere established the existence of geostationary orbit. And that became one of our most important resources of our time. Well, energy is all around us. It's omnipresent, above us and below us. I think this state should commit itself to encouraging and advancing all ideas, safe, scalable, clean sources of energy, including, by the way, advanced geothermal. And yes, we can tap the Earth's magma. We do have the technology to do that, which is an inexhaustible source of energy, not only for our time, but for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skartatos. Mr. Nojay. Mr. Nojay.
Here he comes. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. On the record, or on the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Nojay, take a breath. I know you just ran a great distance.
I know. It's a sad thing that I am out of breath for running that distance. No, Mr. Speaker, thank you. My district includes a lot of folks that would be employed if we had fracking in New York State. And as I've listened to the debate today, I can hardly not notice that most of the people supporting fracking in upstate New York represent districts with people who need jobs, who want jobs, and who would be employed in jobs in the drilling industry. And most of the people who object to fracking, and we shouldn't be under any illusion, this bill is not about more study. This bill is about shutting down that industry in New York State forever. That's what this is about. We've done 5 years of study. Every other state allows fracking. The President of the United States says fracking is a good thing for our economy and for our energy independence. The mayor of New York City, a strong environmentalist, has made clear that fracking is a good thing and good for our economy. There is not one incident in the tens of thousands of wells that has been a documented incidence of contamination of our environment as a result of fracking. And yet, the majority says we need to study it more. There should be no illusion about what this debate is about. It is not about protecting the environment. It is about an intellectual and political jihad against natural fuels. When the member from the majority talked about putting a solar panel on the top of every barn in upstate New York, that fanciful nonsense
will not happen. It is economically impossible for it to happen. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who began advocating that a couple of years ago, knows that it's not going to happen in upstate New York. So what is the agenda? The radical environmental movement is against nuclear power. They're against oil and gas. They're against wind power. They want us to put solar panels on the top of every barn. It is not practical unless you talk about doubling or tripling the cost of our electricity. Now, I don't know about your constituents, but the average family income in my district is $35,000 a year. And if you tell my constituents that they should pay 3 times as much on their monthly electricity bill because somebody thinks there should be solar panels on the top of barns in upstate New York, let's get serious. If you want to provide compassion, and yesterday we heard hours of debate, every single member of the majority that spoke said we should have compassion. I heard a member of the majority talk about looking in a child's eyes and having compassion. Where is the compassion for the child whose mother or father does not have a job in the southern tier? Where is the compassion where the unemployment rate is 20 to 30%? Where is the compassion where across the border in Pennsylvania there is a $700 million construction project to produce electricity, and those jobs in Pennsylvania are not in New York? It has been said that the New York-Pennsylvania border is like the old Berlin Wall. On one side is prosperity and jobs and growth, and on the other side is record unemployment and dilapidated infrastructure and despair. And upstate New York is on the wrong side of that border. If you have compassion and you want to look in those children's eyes and explain why their mother or father does not have a job, then you can vote for this bill. But if you have compassion for the people of upstate New York, then please join me in voting no. Thank you.
Mr. Nozick, thank you, thank you. Mr. Mazzell.
I don't actually care what you call me, just don't call me late for lunch. Actually, I'm waiting so long, I forgot what I wanted to say. I just actually wanted to comment on Mayor Bloomberg. Someone talked about how cautious Mayor Bloomberg is. For the record, it should be known that Mayor Bloomberg does support fracking, I suppose. He just doesn't support it where the New York City watershed is, because he's concerned that if the fracking doesn't work out the way the proponents say it will, we will end up losing our water supply in New York, and then we might as well close up New York City. So it's not so simple. This is a complicated issue, and nobody that opposes fracking or thinks that we should wait wants to deny anybody a job. But we get one chance to do this. Once we make a mistake and the fracking turns out to be injurious to our environment, it cannot be done over. So I support this bill, and I hope it passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazzell. Ms. Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this important bill. I've been outspoken in my opposition to allowing fracking to take place in New York. We have not been able to ascertain whether this practice can be done safely in a way that is safe for the environment and safe for the soil, safe for our water supply, safe for the public health. Now, through the couple-year process of the EIS and the studies and the regulations, over and over again, people have said, but what about the public health impact? So because of the thousands of comments submitted to the DEC, over 80,000 comments, because of the unstoppable rallies and press conferences and meetings and education forums, people in this state have become educated to the very grave possibilities that may happen if fracking does occur and something goes wrong. So the State Department of Health decided they would do a health review. Now, that sounded good initially. They hired 3 independent scientists, public health people, to review the data. But what we've come to realize is that they are just reviewing existing data. They have not committed to doing a full, comprehensive health impacts assessment. And among the things that one of the groups, the Concerned Health Professionals for New York, which is a coalition of the state's foremost public health and environmental experts, have said is, quote, the execution of a well-designed, expansive study does not mean simply reviewing the published literature that already exists and zeroing out uncertainties as no effect defaults. It means aggressively seeking out an array of data sources and bringing a multidisciplinary approach to their analysis. And I think that's exactly what is set out in this bill. You know, I really do not understand the need to hurtle forward in the name of jobs, in the name of profit, when the consequences could be so dangerous, people might have to move out of areas. Jobs, no jobs, it'll be contaminated. It will ruin our water supply. You can't take that back once you've taken that step and gone down that road. You cannot say, oops, sorry, mistake, let's clean it up. You can't clean it up. And you know, all of that is so precious. We cannot ruin our resources without taking a reasoned and fully scientifically vetted approach to this practice. And so in this bill by our colleague and chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee, we are demanding that kind of study. And that's exactly what we need. That is, anyone who is thoughtful about the future of this country, climate change. It's supposed to snow in Washington, D.C. Everyone's freaking out. Oh, no, it's snowing. These kinds of events that we're experiencing in terms of the weather are just symbols of what's going to happen if we keep going down the road for endless profits without taking into account the possible dangerous and deleterious public health impacts and environmental impacts when there are other ways, safer, cleaner ways to fuel our nation's need for energy. So this process so far has been full of confusing timelines and acronyms. We have the regulations, we have the SGIS, we have the deadline for public comment, we have the deadline to release the regulations, and all this complicated scientific terminology. Amidst all this confusing terminology and jargon, one thing is crystal clear. That is, we cannot allow fracking to occur in the state in the absence of a comprehensive public health impact assessment that guarantees that fracking can be done with no adverse and potentially irreversible impacts to public health. That's what this bill calls for. That's why I urge all my colleagues to support it. And I thank you, the Speaker.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
The clerk will record the vote. Mr. Zebrowski to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, as we consider approving hydrofracking in the state of New York, we're not going to get a second chance to get it right. A contaminated water supply or environmental spill or devastated community cannot be fixed. I'm not against natural gas power in and of itself. However, I think my concept on this issue is simple. We know that there have been health and environmental problems in other states and other jurisdictions. I think both sides can kind of agree on that. Therefore, though, the burden of proof on approving this type of activity should be on the industry to prove that hydrofracking is 100% safe. When we deal with health and the environment and water quality, I think the default should be, when we look at approving a dangerous activity, that we don't allow it unless we're 100% sure that it's safe. Not that we do allow it unless you prove that it's 100% not safe. If it takes one study or 10 studies or 1 year or 10 years, I don't really care. I think as we need to assure the residents of the state of New York, based upon past practices in other jurisdictions, that this activity is 100% safe to the environment, to the health, to our water supplies before we approve it. I think our water is that important before we do so. For that reason, Mr. Speaker, I'll be voting in the affirmative. Thank you.
Mr. Zebrowski in the affirmative. Mr. Montesano. He's off. Thank you, Mr. Montesano. Ms. Galef, explain the vote.
Thank you. To explain my vote. A number of people have indicated that those of us who are supporting this bill are from downstate. Well, I have to tell you, I am from downstate, but I care about every New Yorker in the state of New York. And this will not impact us. It could with the chemicals that are in the brine that might be on our roads or whatever. But I really care about the whole state. And that's why I went to Pennsylvania for a long, long day to meet with many people, coordinated by a cooperative extension program, meeting with local officials, meeting with real estate people, meeting with forest rangers to find out really what happened in the Towanda area of Pennsylvania. And as a result of that, I also, and what I learned very quickly was that the state of Pennsylvania was holding on to what were in the chemicals, what was happening. It was under the state health department. It wasn't shared with the localities, which presented a problem even to people who were supportive of hydrofracking in that area. But I also went to a person's home who'd had a terrible problem because of fracking. She actually gave her land away to get a swimming pool, but in the process they did hydrofracking behind her house, which impacted her water, impacted her health. She was in the hospital for a long time because of this. Her house is contaminated, basically. Nobody will live there. And what she said to me, which one of my colleagues had responded to, you know, when she was so sick, she thought the doctor she saw would get involved in this. And it didn't happen until her doctor had an experience with their own daughter. And then there was some issues developed. So I also saw those trucks saying pure water. And that's a funny thing to have trucks running around with pure water on the outside. So the University of Pennsylvania, when I was there, was doing a study of what was going to happen in the hydrofracking area. I think we learned a lesson from Pennsylvania, and we need to just hold tight for 2 years and get more information.
Ms. Galef, your vote?
Thank you. I'm going to vote yes.
Ms. Galef in the affirmative. Courtesy is infectious, ladies and gentlemen. Please extend it to each other. You'll get it back. Thank you very much. Mr. Saladino.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on my vote because of a terrible situation on Long Island. I hear people talk about we need clean water for all New Yorkers. Well, for years, 10 years, I've been representing communities drinking carcinogens, PCEs and PCBs, created when the folks at the Grumman plant were building those warplanes to win the war for America. And now the DEC is turning their back on them. And now New York State says it's okay to drink carcinogens. Now, I have tremendous respect for the sponsor, and I understand the well-intention of many of the folks in this room. And certainly we don't want to hydrofrack right in the watershed for New York City or for a major city. But when we vote to say it's okay to allow people in part of Long Island to drink carcinogens, but then on the other hand, we want to stop hydrofracking, which could be the key to prosperity for upstate, but we don't allow it because of what might happen, ignoring what has happened. That's a big problem. That's a level of hypocrisy I just can't stand for. So I'll be voting no. I hope that we can improve science to the point where we can do this safely. I appreciate those who are concerned about some New Yorkers, but the DEC has to get off and make sure that we protect the water on Long Island from those dangerous chemicals so that we can be truly honest about protecting groundwater for all New Yorkers. At this stage, I'll be voting in the negative.
Mr. Saladino in the negative. Mr. Dinowitz to explain his vote.
Thank you. There have really been very few issues for which so many of my constituents have reached out to me. They are concerned about everybody's drinking water. And they really fall into two categories, not three, because nobody has said, let's do this. Either they're opposed to hydrofracking, or more commonly, they want to know what the real ramifications are. It's certainly not unreasonable for us to do an exhaustive study to make sure that this is safe. We do that with so many other things, and once you start this process, you can't unstart it. There are so many people right now who are the victims of mistakes that have been made in the past with respect to the environment. They could be genetic diseases. They could be almost anything. We can't undo this. So we have to know that we're doing the right thing. I don't want to see anybody suffering. Yes, I want to see clean, cheap energy. I think all of us do. But we don't want to be stupid about it. So we have to know what the results are. We have to know that this is a safe process. And I would hope everybody would agree. So I think, being a very compassionate person, that I can only vote yes on this bill.
Mr. Dinowitz in the affirmative. Mr. Crouch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a little bit of irony, if you will. Maybe there's a number of the speakers that expressed some concern and urging a yes vote in support of this moratorium. They'll go home and they'll turn up the thermostat. Their natural gas furnace will kick in. They'll go out in the kitchen and they'll put on the pot on the stove and they'll turn the stove on and their natural gas stove will come on. They'll cook their dinner and then they'll be able to utilize all the benefits of natural gas from somebody else's backyard. And yet we want to believe that they're truly strong in their beliefs of solar power and everything. I want to make sure that they put their solar unit up on top of their house or their windmill out in their backyard or whatever, but allow upstate New York to look at the jobs that we may be able to produce. I want to emphasize, I'm sure that DEC can do this right. So I think we should let DEC, when they get done with their study that they're doing, let them issue their final results, whatever it is, and do their job, and not stand in the way of that. I'm voting in the negative.
Mr. Crouch in the negative. Mr. Steck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be voting in the affirmative on this bill. I think a lot of the proponents of hydrofracking are confusing the difference between economic activity and economic development. Not all economic activity is economic development. We live in a time where we need, for a variety of reasons that my colleagues have mentioned, to go away from fossil fuels. Now, in my district, we have a worldwide leader in all economic activity, but also in alternative energy, and that is the General Electric Company, which is a major employer in my district. They're investing heavily in wind power, in battery storage, so we can make better use of the energy that's generated through alternative methods, and I'm sure, like the Europeans, they will be moving in the direction of photovoltaic cells. I think there's far more to be gained in this state by promoting alternative energy in terms of the creation of jobs, and that is why I think hydrofracking is really a distraction from what we need to be doing in terms of economic development, as indicated, I'll be voting in the affirmative.
Mr. Steck in the affirmative. Mr. Curran. 1 minute, Mr. Curran. Mr. Graff is going to move and get out of your way. Thank you, Mr. Graff.
Thank you, Mr. Graff. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the first 2 years that I've been up here, I voted for this moratorium each and every time. And I did so because of the belief that before we actually approve the process of hydrofracking, we should have an independent health impact study completed so that we know that the process is safe. I will continue to vote in favor of this moratorium here today under reservations that I feel that we are at a point where we are just constructing more roadblocks and barriers to actually getting to the point where we come to a conclusion as to whether or not this process is actually safe and whether we will then engage in constructing real regulations to protect the safety of the individuals that engage in the process as well as the landowners there as well. And then obviously derive the benefit from the economic benefits of the process. But as I had said, with every delay in setting back deadlines for regulations and new and other studies that need to be done, I just start getting the feeling that we may never get to the point where we will legitimately consider whether or not this process is safe and whether or not we will legitimately benefit as a state with regards to hydrofracking. But again, I will wait for the independent health impact study to be completed, and for that reason I will vote in the affirmative for this bill this year. Thank you.
Mr. Curran in the affirmative. Ms. Peoples-Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote, I want to commend the sponsor of this bill because although there's been a lot of conversation about this for at least the last 5 years, we still are not at the point where there's not one scientist or chemist who will say that once the wastewater comes back from hydrofracking this natural gas, that it's going to be safe to put somewhere. No one has been able to say that yet. And if it takes another year or 2 or 5 or whatever for that decision to come up correctly, then I think we should be waiting for that. I wish that many of us in this room who support this piece of legislation today were around like 200 years ago when we were having a similar discussion in this country about lead poisoning. But, those of us who think in a distance were not around. The only people who were around that wanted to see capital grow faster and plants make paint faster and all those sort of things. And now we all still pay for that in dealing with children who have issues with their education because they've been poisoned by lead. It took this country almost 200 years to figure out that it was not a good thing to have lead paint for children. And as a result of that, we're still paying for it. So let us not wait, 200, 300, 400 years from now to find out that there's something wrong with the chemicals that are used to extract the natural gas. Now, the gas is natural. So are we as people. They're created by the same creator. We're supposed to have access to it. We're supposed to be able to use it. But we're not supposed to be able to use it if it's going to cause us harm to get it. There must be an easier way. I'm going to believe that the scientists will figure that out because it is natural and we are supposed to have access to it. Right now they haven't, and right now I think there should be a moratorium. I agree with the sponsor and we'll be voting in support of it.
Ms. Peoples-Stokes in the affirmative. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote, Chautauqua County has been hydrofracking natural gas wells for 60 years, 6 decades. We have over 5,000 hydrofrac wells in Chautauqua County. Our school districts drill wells next to the school building, hydrofrac them, and use it to heat the schools. I've heard horror stories that have suggested that if there's hydrofracking in your community, it will become a desolate wasteland. My community, my county's largest single industry is agritourism. We have 21 wineries. They are very successful. You'll see a hydrofrac well on almost all the wine fields because they use the natural gas to heat the house. We have, year after year, award-winning water quality as voted on at the state fair, year after year. We have the largest, highest volume natural aquifer in the state of New York, serving Jamestown. Hydrofracking wells is not the end of our natural environment. It can be done safely. It has been done safely. And with proper regulation and review, it can be done safely in the future. We have been studying the impacts of hydrofracking for over a half a century because it deals with our residents. We have a water resource specialist that does nothing but focus on water quality in Chautauqua County. and I am glad to report that we have not experienced problems with hydrofracking. A 2-year moratorium to study this after 60 years and thousands of wells is overkill. Thank you.
How do you vote, Mr. Goodell?
Mr. Speaker, this may surprise you, but I'm not in favor of this bill.
Mr. Goodell in the negative. Mr. Levine.
First, I'd like to thank the sponsor for continually fighting for environmental protection. And secondly, on the subject of compassion, I've kind of always thought I'm a fairly compassionate person, but I do have to say that I admire very much my colleagues, many on the opposite side of the aisle, who consider themselves to be compassionate conservatives. And at the same time, I wish to tell them that I fully appreciate that what that really means is that you have compassion for conservatives. But I'd like to reserve some compassion for the people throughout the state of New York and for their health. And finally, as far as the subject of carcinogenic waters on Long Island goes, I'm going to vote for this bill. I'm going to cast my vote in the affirmative, and that I hope that by voting for this bill and seeing this bill implemented in New York State, we are all fighting to make sure that as few New Yorkers as is humanly possible get to be forced by our DEC to drink carcinogenic water, which I don't think any of us are much in favor of. So my vote is cast in the affirmative. Thank you.
Mr. Levine in the affirmative. Mr. Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to echo the comments of my colleagues, Mr. Ryan. I also represent Buffalo and parts of Lackawanna, which are beautiful waterfront cities, and we are working with one of the largest brownfield opportunity areas in the state of New York. And when we listen to these companies, I hear individual profits, but we want community solutions to these problems. We want you to pay for the cleanup for these things. And why is this necessary? Because many of the companies won't voluntarily cooperate with the EPA. So I do think that we need to listen to the experts. They have not issued their findings. And in the city of Buffalo and Lackawanna, we are living with this daily, with the Army Corps of Engineers dredging beautiful Lake Erie from the remnants of Bethlehem Steel and Republic Steel. So I do believe that we should have some of the strongest regulations in the state, the strictest in the nation, to protect the health and welfare of our great New Yorkers. So I cast my vote in the affirmative today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Kearns in the affirmative. Mr. Moya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the sponsor of the bill for putting forth a piece of legislation that will protect our most basic and necessary resource, our water. Moving forward and issuing permits is not only hasty, it would be irresponsible. And it's our job as elected officials is to pass legislation that will protect New Yorkers. There is simply no data to prove that hydrofracking is safe. There is no proof that it won't damage the water that our families drink, or that it won't devastate the land in the areas where the drilling will occur. Until we have such evidence, I will continue to support a moratorium on licenses. And I will be voting in the affirmative, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Mr. Moya in the affirmative. Ms. Maliatakis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to speak and explain my vote because I do see that there is a flaw in this legislation. It was actually brought up by one of my colleagues, Ms. Corwin, earlier in the debate. I have voted for the moratorium in the past. In fact, 2011, which was my first year here, I voted for it. In 2012, I joined you in voting for the study. However, this piece of legislation, I think, is flawed and does need clarification. And so what I would do is suggest to the sponsor if perhaps they can make it specific to the high-volume fracturing. Low-volume fracturing has been done in this state safely since the 1940s. And I hear a lot of my colleagues talk about how this legislation is going to protect their water. What it is going to do is very much hurt an industry in this state that provides a lot of jobs and a big boost to our economy. And while I do oppose the hydraulic fracturing that of high volume, that is also protected with a moratorium currently until the review is complete. So I want to make sure everyone in here is clear that we're talking about two separate things here. There's low volume and high volume. Low volume has been in the state since the 1940s without detriment to the water supply. And the high volume, which is the one that I would join you in a moratorium for, is already protected until the study is complete, at which time then we should evaluate the study and make a determination on whether we want to use high volume in the state of New York. So for those reasons, I'm voting in the negative for this particular piece of legislation. I do hope that they will make more clarification to this bill to ensure that we're only talking about the one type of hydrofracturing, because at a time when we're talking about high energy costs and we're talking about the need for energy independence, I think to try to ban something or put a moratorium on something that has proven to have been safe since the 1940s is ill-conceived. And I vote in the negative. Thank you.
Ms. Maliatakis in the negative. Mr. Peter Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hadn't planned to explain my vote on this issue, but I have to just raise a couple issues, and we've had some very thoughtful conversation. But there were a couple of comments that were made, one positive, one more dismaying. The dismaying one was the effect that if anyone has compassion, if they come from a different ideological perspective, that somehow their compassion may be misdirected or self-serving. And that to me was, I felt very unfortunate about that comment being made. The other comment that was made that I thought was more proactive was that talking about the natural resource base and that we need to have access to something that's available to us. And that gets back to the issue of being stewards. And that's really what we're talking about here today. We're talking about how do we assess the risk and the reward of the potential use of this natural resource to us and our families. How do we protect groundwater? How do we ensure that people's safety is protected? And how do we ensure, if possible, how do we ensure that natural gas, if it can be available through this methodology, is made available safely? That's really what we're talking about. And we need to remind everyone there is a process. The EC is proceeding. The governor has a moratorium in effect for low volume or high volume fracturing. And there is still a moratorium unless and until DEC permits. So again, we need to remain focused on the issue. And again, being good stewards, we all have that responsibility. It's not divided by ideology or party or geography. So I will be voting no on this. I have supported moratoriums in the past. This one overreaches. I have supported health studies in the past. This one's packaged into this. Unfortunately, I can't vote for it in this form. But again, I encourage us to stay focused on this issue, and let's do it in good faith, people. And I vote in the negative on this measure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Peter Lopez in the negative. Mr. Goldfeder on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to explain my vote. I'm guilty. I go around my district and I tell every one of my constituents that one of my biggest priorities is making sure that we can get our economy out of the rut and we're going to create real jobs that we can provide for our families. But if I would tell those same constituents that we'll get you a job, but it may cost the safety and the health of your family, do you still want it? And I'm quite certain, without actually asking, they would say no. Because the bottom line is, one life, one sickness, one disease is not worth all the jobs this is going to create. And if you could say, I'm not saying do away with it. I'm saying until it's safe, we should not be experimenting. I don't want to experiment with my kids. I wouldn't want to experiment with any of my constituents' kids. And I wouldn't want to experiment with anybody's families. Because the bottom line is we're in a day and age where we can wait. We're not in a rush. We can wait until we know that it's safe, that our families are protected, and that we can do the right thing by everybody in this state. It's not about one community versus another. It's not about creating jobs upstate versus downstate. It's about doing the right thing for the entire state. And if we all took a moment to think about what's right for the entire state, everybody would agree that we should be voting yes on this bill.
Mr. Goldfeder in the affirmative. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 95, noes 40.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you again to all the members for their participation this afternoon and their work. I do want to acknowledge a group that is here, a group of teachers and paraprofessionals from New York City Central School District number 25 and 26. Mr. Weprin, Mr. Kim, Ms. Rozic, and Mr. Braunstein have this group up here, and they're here to talk to legislators and talk about the work that they do as teachers and paraprofessionals. I'd ask you to extend the courtesies of the floor to this fine group.
On behalf of Mr. Weprin and all of the Queen's delegation, since we all claim credit for you, we welcome these educators and advocates for education here to the New York State Assembly. We hope that you have enjoyed the deliberations of the day. We extend to you the privileges of the floor, and we are always happy to see you and have you come back anytime you can. Thank you so very much. Mr. Jordan, a series of introductions, I'm told.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to interrupt the proceedings. To the rear of the chamber, we are joined by someone who I think all of us would claim is our constituent, our former colleague, Mr. Dan Burling. I would ask that you welcome him back and extend to him the cordialities of the House.
Mr. Burling, it is a pleasure. We don't need to extend the privileges of the floor. As a member, you have it, and you missed basketball practice last night. Just let me know that. Welcome back, Mr. Burling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of a number of our Assembly colleagues, including Assemblymember Brindisi, Blankenbush, Butler, and Tenney, we're honored to be joined today by staff and consumers of the Oneida Lewis chapter of ARC, and they include Frank Santola, Karen Koritzer, Rosemary Spriggs, Kathy Gaffney, Lisa Anson, Ada Mariani, Zeta Morell, Deb Washington, Dartavius Woodley, Joanne Maimon Mox, Julian Gaimo, and Wendy Maiga. I would ask that you extend these folks the warm welcome from the House as they're here today advocating for issues that are important to them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Certainly. On behalf of Mr. Brindisi, Mr. Blankenbush, Ms. Tenney, we welcome these distinguished visitors here to the floor of the New York State Assembly. We hope you have appreciated the debate that we just had. We hope that you will extend to you the privileges of the floor and that you will come back and visit us soon and get home safe. Thank you for coming. Go, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to close with a very special guest, on behalf of Assemblymember DiPietro, Sidney Gouet, a precocious first grader, is here with us today. She is here because, as many of us have enjoyed the fine artwork in the well, Sidney's artwork was selected to represent her school, the Warsaw Central School in Warsaw, New York. She's here exhibiting her art, enjoying the day off from school, and I am sure is having a great time. So we would ask that you would welcome Sidney and extend to her the cordialities of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On behalf of Mr. DiPietro, the Speaker, and all the members, we welcome you, Cindy, as a up-and-coming prominent artist in our state. We hope to have you back again. We hope we can display your work at future times. Continue your great work, and thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Any resolutions or further housekeeping?
We have a number of resolutions, one which we will take up singly. Shall I read it? This is a resolution, Assembly resolution advising the members of the Senate at the time and place of a joint session to cast a joint ballot for the purposes of electing regents of the University of the State of New York pursuant to Section 202 of the Education Law. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The resolution passed. These other resolutions we will take up in one vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The resolutions are passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please recognize Ms. Peoples-Stokes for the purpose of an announcement?
Ms. Peoples-Stokes for the purposes of an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You do recall at the very beginning of the session, the Majority Leader announced that we would be having conference following session. So I'm standing to announce that there is an immediate conference of all Democratic members in the Speaker's conference room.
Immediate Democratic conference in the Speaker's conference room after session. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I now move that the Assembly stand adjourned until Thursday, March 7th at 10 a.m., tomorrow being a session day.
The Assembly stands adjourned.